Greetings to you, friends. Thank you, Ajane, for that wonderful poetry and for words that I think truly set the tone for understanding the stakes of our time, the lives that we are attempting to live with power and grace. And so today, I endeavor to share with you a few words on this idea, all things in common. If you have ever spent time with children who are just learning how to speak, there are two words you are likely to hear from them. One of those words is no. Children get excited when they learn the word no. They're excited because it means they can deny something. They can set a boundary. They can opt out of what you want from them. But there's a second word that often pops up right next to it. Can you guess? It's the word mine. See, if you want to see the concept of ownership, watch a baby hold on to an object and say, mine. Nobody has to teach a baby to claim things. It's an impulse they are born with. Human beings have a capacity, a desire for ownership. The psychologist William James argued this over 100 years ago. He said that humans have an innate desire to possess. He said it was about a desire for attachment. Anything we can put the word my in front of becomes external evidence of who we are. My house, my car, my pets, my children, my parents, my partner, my spouse, my significant other, my friends. James argues that we have a similar impulse to collect property. And this is not just a material situation, but an emotional one too. We have a particular relationship to our objects, to our people, to our homes. Our physical homes not only give us protection, but also give us an inner life that is hidden from the rest of the world. You have perhaps heard the scripture passage. The earth is the Lord's and all that is in it, the world and those who live in it. See, there was a time when people took that seriously. But the idea of owning the earth transformed the world. It eradicated civilizations. It displaced people. It also gave people the ability to move and live in ways that they had never imagined. Empire and imperialism were fueled by and thrived on the idea of possession and ownership. What can I take captive? What can I claim as mine? What can I place a divine stamp of approval on and say, this belongs to me? Our lives are fundamentally different because of the idea of ownership. Ownership is social, political, and theological. What we claim as ours reflects our sense of values, morality, and power. So my reading of Acts chapter 4 is social, political, and theological. Socially, this group of believers has decided to shift their personal boundaries. They have chosen life together in ways that are deeply intertwined and entangled. They gave up personal and private ownership in order to make sure that everyone had enough. Politically, Their practice of sharing property is consistent with Hellenistic or Greek cultural values. See, the Hellenists, the ancient Greeks, considered friendship as one of the first things, the primary concerns of human life. Friendship is an intimacy, a loyalty, a chosen bond, not just something we were born into, but something we chose for ourselves. The Hellenist philosophers called this eudaimonia. That's a Greek word that's often translated into happiness, but more broadly, eudaimonia refers to the good life. The good life was not about possessions, but about human flourishing and human welfare. But theologically, their actions are also a reflection of what they believe about Jesus the Christ. After all, it was Jesus who was said to claim this: I come that you might have life and life more abundantly. A theology of abundance believes that there is enough. A theology of abundance says that where God is, provision is made, but they don't just believe it, they act on it. They recognize themselves as co-creators and co-laborers with God. They realize that God's provision is connected to human participation. They realize that your theology cannot simply be theoretical. It must also be kinetic. It must be in motion. It must be activity, taking our hands and our feet and our mouths and our bodies and our very being and putting them to work in the world. For even as the biblical account shows us an Adam, a creature placed in a garden, put to work, set to transform and shape and take dominion over space, we too are invited into a creative process, such that what God has placed before us is for stewardship, not necessarily ownership. The description, though, in Acts 4 is beautiful, but at the same time, it's challenging. Now, I don't mean to say that it's impossible. What I mean is that it's a reflection of a time, of a place, of a culture very different from ours. Ours is an era in which people don't even know their neighbors. Ours is an era of dramatic excess and profound lack sitting right next to each other. This is an era in which people own million-dollar homes and look down the street at homeless encampments. This is an era in which resurrection feels impossible because we are used to being the walking dead. Who are the walking dead? Well, to be the walking dead means I am alive, but I am not living. It means I am animated, but I am without a soul. It means that I am moving, but I'm not feeling. And our world has been shaped around a process, a system, a strategy of numbing. We have so much in order to numb ourselves, and it dulls the pain, but it also kills the joy. See, in a world where resurrection seems impossible, we misunderstand the meaning and significance of abundance. Abundance does not mean as much as we want, but as much as we need. And when we have been so accustomed to taking hold of everything we want, it's difficult to understand that sort of twinge, that feeling, that reminder that tells us we are satisfied, that we have enough, that our needs have been met. And so we are the walking dead. People who are stuck somewhere between life and death, somewhere between resurrection and the grave. We are trying to figure out, and have been trying to figure out for the last year, what it looks like to get up out of the grave. A year ago, life as we once knew it died a common death. Regardless of what we had going on, regardless of what we had planned, regardless of where we lived or what we were doing, everything came to a stop and life as we knew it died. And in that moment, in that season, a question arose for me. Who will we become after resurrection? Because it's one thing to go through the Easter season and sit at the foot of the cross and to lament Holy Saturday and to recall that early one Sunday morning Jesus rose. But what do you do Monday or Tuesday? What do you do in the weeks to come, in the months after, in the years that pass? Remember, by the time these stories are written down, we are years past the life and earthly ministry of Jesus the Christ. These are being written to and for people who need to know how to sustain on the other side of resurrection. I'm here to tell you the Acts community is a resurrection community. And how do we know they're a resurrection community? Well, the text reminds us that with great power, the apostles preached. And they preached a testimony of the resurrection, and grace was upon them. What they did was not possible except on the other side of resurrection. But we also know resurrection is not possible except on the other side of death. So tell me, what has to die in order for us to be a resurrection community? Because it's really hard to preach resurrection to the living dead, to those for whom life has been killing them daily, and death feels like a respite, feels like a welcome friend. What do you say to folks who believe they would be better off in a grave than to be living in extreme impoverishment, to be living in extreme suffering and illness, to be living out of doors, no shelter over their heads, no food to fill their bellies? Is that life? Or is that being the living dead? It's hard to preach resurrection to the living dead, because what is the point of resurrection to a dead life? I got out the grave for this. I left behind slumber for this. How do we become a resurrection community? Well, I've said it before, resurrection only comes on the other side of death. These are people who have understood what it is to see and recognize death, not just in the form of Jesus upon the cross, but in a culture of crucifixion, of folks who have become accustomed to loss, to lament, to grief and suffering. Let me remind you, the crucifixion of Jesus was neither the first nor the last. There was a culture that enabled, that empowered these processes of execution within their society. So keep in mind, bear in mind, a culture of crucifixion makes you feel like death is always around the corner. But somehow they found a way through the specter of death to claim and hear the testimony of the power of resurrection. And on the other side of resurrection, lay claim to a life that is renewed, regenerated, restored, and reborn. It is impossible to have all things in common if I think my life and my liberty and my liberation have nothing in common with yours. It's been said before, if you come here to help, you're in the wrong place. But if you've come because you believe your liberation is bound up with mine, we might be able to do something. The liberation of the Acts community is bound up in these common understandings. They have a common heart. They are moved and touched and provoked to take the power of the resurrection and apply it to the circumstances of their material and social being. They have a common soul. They believe that the freedom, the welfare of their being, of their lives, of their spiritual growth is tied together and cannot be broken. They have a common grace. As my grandfather used to say it from the pulpit, grace, God's riches at Christ's expense. For the sake of Christ's life, death, and resurrection, they have been gifted and graced with power to do what they could not do otherwise, because you have to fight against your natural inclination in order to find your way to a resurrection community. Let me tell you, friends, the good life is not about accumulation. In fact, it might be about recognizing how much we can give away and get out of the way and see how goodness yet remains. The goodness of God is not tied to the materiality of this world. There's nothing wrong with liking nice things. Nothing wrong with nice clothes, a nice car, a nice place to live, good food on your plate. Nothing wrong with those things. But as it has been written, what does it profit us to gain the whole world and lose our souls? My friends, if we truly believe that we can have all things in common, then let us ask ourselves the sober question: what must die in order for resurrection community to live? The answer may not be the same for all of us. If you weren't born with a silver spoon in your mouth, perhaps riches mean very little to you. Perhaps you have lived an ascetic life. You have already given up so much material. Perhaps you have had so much taken from you that the thought of giving up more seems impossible. Well, this is the beauty of the Acts community. Those who had gave. Those who needed received. We may not all have to give up the same thing, but I'm convinced that if we take stock of what must die in our own circumstances, when the community comes together, it will be distributed to each as they have need. Let's hold all things in common, and our common hearts, our common souls, our common liberation to be the hands and the feet of God made manifest in this world. That, my friends, is how we live on the other side of resurrection. God bless you.